Hi, everyone. Very good afternoon to you today, and thank you for joining us this afternoon on EngageRocket's very first analytics lab that we're holding live on Google. So this is going to be part of a series of webcasts that we're going to do in response to all the questions that we get from customers, from the people that we deal with, from partners, about what is people analytics, how do we use analytics in our day-to-day, what is the value of analytics to the business, to HR, to individual managers, and even to the individual employee themselves. So there's quite a lot of ground to cover, and we of course welcome any suggestions on burning questions that you have that you'd like us to address that we might be able to do in future webcasts. But for today, we're going to be dealing with how we actually run pulse surveys and how do we make them simple. Now, it's really interesting because when we started EngageRocket just a couple of years ago, the term pulse survey was almost unheard of. There were a few people that have heard mutterings about pulse surveys within the HR circles. Definitely no one in business recognized that term when we used it. And now, just 2 years and a bit later, there are myriad different definitions of pulse surveys that exist in the market. Some of which are good and helpful, some of which might be a little bit perhaps misguided and might lead HR teams and their managers down the wrong path, especially when implementing such programs. So today, we're really going to be covering a quick launch guide that's going to take over the next 58 minutes or so. And we're going to cover the ins and outs of what pulse surveys are and how we can use the results to benefit both HR as well as the business. And as we're streaming this live on YouTube, please feel free to add questions to the comments, and we will try to address them during the time that we have together. So with that, sit tight and let's dive straight in to pulse surveys. I'm going to give a bit of time so that the time lag works out. But today, as mentioned, we're talking about pulse surveys and making them simple. We don't have to be afraid of what this is, and we also want to understand a little bit better about, is this just another HR or management fad that is going to disappear in the next year or so? But first, a little bit more about EngageRocket. So EngageRocket was built to help companies to build better workplaces with people analytics. That is our core mission and our vision. And ultimately, what that boils down to for our customers and the relationships that we've built in the market is to help them use analytics in 3 main areas when it comes to their talent. The first area would be to help their talent belong to their company. So this could be everything from helping them feel great from day 1 or even from day -7, all the way to their first year at work and beyond, and keeping them engaged and productive throughout. So being able to help companies help their talent to belong. The second area that we help companies in is to help their talent to grow. So being able to apply analytics to identify blind spots or skills gaps that need to be filled at the individual level and at the enterprise level, to be able to look at learning needs analyses to find out where exactly are we investing our training dollars, our mentorship time, and our coaching time, and where would bring us the biggest bang for our buck. And finally, we help their talent to perform so that they can improve their performance as a business and as individuals over time. So helping their talent to belong, grow, and perform is what we at EngageRocket strive to do with our customers. So we've been fortunate to have been labeled one of the 20 hottest startups by the Singapore Business Review just this year. And because of the mission that we have, we've also been mentioned in quite a number of different media outlets, and we've had the fortune of being featured in so many different avenues. And a little bit more about me and who I am and what is it that gives me any reason for talking to you guys. So I'm Chetan, the co-founder and CEO of EngageRocket, and together with Dorothy, our other co-founder, we've done this for a living for more than 7 years now, and we started out running a regional division of a global HR consulting company, and what we found was that the traditional consulting model had significant challenges, especially when it came to employee engagement surveys, which was the bread and butter of what we did. So these challenges lay in the latency of data reporting, getting to the right people, the quality of insights that we could deliver at scale, as well as just how long it took and the amount of energy that had to go into just the administration and preparation for a survey, and how that detracted from the actual actions that should have come out from those surveys. And it got to the point that the amount of energy spent on getting the survey right far exceeded the amount of energy that went into taking action on the results of that survey. And with that as a foundational element of the consulting business model, we felt that it did have significant challenges to the companies and the clients that we were working with. So it's not that consultants aren't useful. It's just that when it came to running real-time analytics, to be able to pull data across multiple different companies and clients instantly, essentially, consultants and human brains just aren't ideal in being able to be applied to that task. So we turned to technology and founded EngageRocket. So over the course of the rest of this webinar, we'll be covering the following 4 areas. The first area is something that we get asked a lot. Are we mature enough to start? Or in other words, when do we start running pulse surveys for our teams and our customers, our companies? Secondly, how do we execute on these pulse surveys? So if we agree that we are mature enough to start, what is it that we should do and can do that will allow us to run a wildly successful program? So we're going to outline 4 critical steps. Thirdly, we're going to go into one common mistake that's sabotaging your participation rates in any survey that you do, but especially in pulse surveys. And there are a few different common errors which we can run into for other webinars. But for today's webcast, we're going to focus really specifically on the one common mistake that holds the potential to derail your program entirely from the get-go. So we want to make sure that we address that mistake early and as robustly as we can. And then finally, we're going to go through what is it that we're going to use this data for. So after setting this up, which doesn't take a lot of time, thankfully, how do we use the data to actually make better management decisions, to actually improve the quality of interactions at work, to build better workplaces? And of course, how do we improve business performance? So with that as the backdrop, I wanted to start us off actually with a question. In this day and age where big data has become the norm, where analytics and Google is able to predict where you want to go, what you're going to say, all our information is already integrated into the cloud. You might already wear a watch or a fitness tracker that measures your steps and heartbeats every few minutes. Wouldn't we be able to know immediately what our people are thinking? Auto-magically. Why do we need surveys at all? And when we started EngageRocket, this was a big question that we wrestled with, because having done surveys for a living, we knew that the response rates are not always automatic, that there's some energy that needs to go into the initiative to drive responses. There are always these questions about, oh, are we actually collecting the true feelings of people, or are people going to be just telling us what we want to hear? And how do we get people to respond to this if they are in an F&B type environment or retail environment where they're on the shop floor all the time? Like, do we need to take them out of the shop floor to get them to respond to these surveys if they don't know how to speak English well, for example? Can they respond in a meaningful way? So there's so many different possible challenges to being able to collect feedback from employees using surveys as a methodology. So the big question that we posed to ourselves was, okay, great. Actually, what are the alternatives to surveys if we wanted to get to read the minds, so to speak, of employees and find out what matters to them, what motivates them, and how we can change our management styles in order to improve their lives and their productivity at work? So we found that there was a spectrum of possible methods to collect such feedback, ranging from the most expensive and most time-consuming to the cheapest and least time-consuming. So at the most expensive and highly active, meaning it requires a lot of effort from respondents. At that end of the spectrum, we have functional magnetic resonance imaging scans, fMRI scans. So these scans are able to highlight parts of the brain which light up and are active, therefore, due to given stimulus. So you could, for example, put someone into an fMRI machine and ask them different questions, or show them different images, put them in different situations, which you could then monitor which parts of their brain start becoming active. And obviously, as I am talking through this, the practicalities of running fMRI scans for everyone in the company, even once a year, would start burdening your you wouldn't have to do anything else for the rest of the year. That you just be running people through fMRI scans. Not to mention they're extremely expensive, and the ability to interpret the scans is also difficult. You need literally brain surgeons and people who are familiar with neuroscience to be able to interpret those scans. Along the same lines would be blood tests. So being able to collect either blood or cell samples to be able to identify, for example, increases in serotonin or dopamine in response to certain stimulus at work. Now, obviously, again, this takes time, and it's also very, very costly in terms of money and time. At the other end of the spectrum, you do find more passive trackers where the respondent actually doesn't need to do that much. So there are certain wearable technologies, which we alluded to a little bit earlier, where essentially the technology already exists to be able to track both the location as well as the speech of each individual, and to report back on sentiment, and where people are spending the most time. And then there's also organizational network analysis, or ONA, which does a pretty good job nowadays of tracking the email patterns of every single individual and inferring from those patterns, is this person going to burn out soon, or is this person showing patterns of being a high performer? So both of these require a little bit of setup time. So the setup costs and time are high. So being able to distribute wearables and convince everybody to wear them all the time, for example, in ONA, to be able to set up your email servers such that they are already tracking how and where those emails are going. And they're great once they're set up. But again, you do require quite specialized knowledge to be able to interpret the results in a meaningful way that would lead directly to follow-up action. So, for instance, you might find that the email patterns of a high-performing salesperson is that it's very densely concentrated internally, because they might need to get a lot of organizational buy-in to close a big deal. So the question then becomes, how do we train the rest of our sales force to perform in a similar way? And ONA might be able to give you that insight, but doesn't exactly tell you how to go about doing that. So with all of these different methods of mind reading and organizational mind reading, we've decided that surveys might be one of the oldest methods of collecting feedback from people, but at the same time, it's also extremely scalable in different languages using technology. And also, you start being able to get very clear, actionable insight from the surveys if you've done them correctly and you set them up right. In fact, one of the companies in the world that knows big data the best is Facebook. Their recent challenges aside, they have one of the largest data sets of across the world, and with more than analyzing data constantly from more than 1 billion users. Yet, their head of people operations, or HR, recently published in the Harvard Business Review, and he wrote that surveys are still the best way to measure employee engagement. So even for myself, when I read this and when our team read this, we were a little bit surprised that Facebook was coming out to say this in a journal as prestigious as the HBR. And what Facebook reports in that article is, in fact, the survey data that they collected was very efficiently done compared to all the rest of their other analyses, and actually was the most predictive of talent leaving the organization than any other data source. In fact, for example, what they found was that for individuals that did not respond to their regular surveys, they were 2.6 times more likely to leave the organization over the next 6 months than were anybody else who actually took the survey. When we ran similar analyses here in EngageRocket, we noticed that the number was eerily close, that we had a 2.74 times multiple in terms of likelihood to leave an organization from non-respondents to a survey as compared to respondents to a survey, regardless of what the respondents shared. The other thing that we do come across a lot is companies that would share with us, oh, actually, we already do surveys once a year. Or sometimes they would share with us, oh, we do surveys every 2 years, and in between we run a pulse survey. So effectively making their survey frequency once a year. And all of this is perfectly fine, much better than not doing any form of feedback collection at all. However, the challenges arise when you think about how fast and how quickly business is progressing today. A study done by Professor Foster at Yale University looked at companies on the S&P 500. And in the 1920s, the average lifespan of those companies was extremely high. It was 67 years. Meaning if I was a company, say Coca-Cola, and I was on the S&P 500 in the 1920s, I could expect to stay on that index for the next almost 7 decades. However, when you look at companies on the S&P 500 today, he found that on average, they could expect to stay on the index for only another 15 years. And in fact, he estimates that within 10 years, half of the S&P 500 would look completely different from what it looks like today. And what that means is that companies have really less than 15 years to make a difference. And if we're collecting data on our people at the latency of once a year, once every 2 years, how do we use that data meaningfully to understand the impact of things like changing benefits programs or increasing L&D spend or changing the hiring process, tweaking the hiring process to change first-year retention? How do we even go about stopping our best people from leaving or understanding why our best people are leaving our organization through change or through the latest acquisition that has happened? How do we then react to this in real time without using gut feel? But the problem, as is understandable, is in the past, it used to take weeks or months to get this data. So when we look at what has changed from even just 5 to 10 years ago, in the past, you could just hire XYZ global consulting firm to run a survey every 2 years, and then run your own quote-unquote pulse survey in between yourselves or through another provider. But this model has one slight problem. If you're trying to get data on something as highly volatile as employee sentiment just once a year, you miss a huge amount of variation within the year. If it takes you weeks or months to get your survey set up and to get the results back, your team composition might have entirely changed by the time your line managers get their results. So a typical project that you might already be running is you have a lead time of a good 8 to 12 weeks, where the consultants would be gathering information on what kind of questions to ask. And then you got another 2 weeks to 4 weeks of a survey data collection period. And then you run into another, say, at its fastest, maybe 6 to 10 weeks of analysis time, before which you get the top line results that are presented to management. And then there's several more deliberations before the data can then be cascaded down to the line managers. And by the time they receive that data, not only is it 2 to 3 months after the survey has been done, in a good project, the information they receive is also possibly in a 25 or 30-page slide deck with lots of charts and graphs, making it very difficult to understand the next point. So what? What am I supposed to do with this data? And the result of that is the HR would struggle to get these projects run on a yearly basis. And there's the understanding, of course, which is a good one, that it's important for data collection to happen on a regular basis, but because it's so effortful to do so, there's no momentum and there's therefore no results within the organization. By the time you run the survey again the next year, there's so many other things that have happened over the course of 12 months that it's very difficult to attribute what caused any increase or change in the survey results, if at all. So what happens after 3 to 4 years is companies decide, okay, this is not working for us. We should stop doing these surveys until we get our act together. So that obviously is a big challenge, and this is where pulse surveys come in. So the first question that we want to address is, are we mature enough to start? Or when exactly is the right time for us to begin running a pulse survey program? And this is a common thread that we hear a lot. Oh, we're not ready. Our organization is not mature enough. We just spent 9 months implementing our HR information system, HR management system. There's just too much change in the organization right now. Or we already are running our annual surveys, and we can't stomach yet another change in the organization. And in some cases, we'd agree. I definitely true that there are some cases in which your company might not yet be ready for running a pulse survey program. But in many cases, what we realize is that it's actually not as hard as you might think it is. And this is what we've noticed across the more than 26,000 users that we've touched since we've started, that actually there are just 4 simple questions that you can ask yourself to determine whether or not you're ready for this shift. So doing this sanity check, the first question is, do people in your company use smartphones? If they don't, then you're absolutely not ready to run pulse surveys, because the data collection overheads would be extremely high. Just imagine doing paper and pen data entry on a monthly basis, or even worse, on a weekly basis. There's just no way that administrative burden is worth the value of the insights that could be generated. However, if you and your people do, you're on one step on the way to being ready. And this is true whether you use EngageRocket or any other survey software, because these days these surveys can actually be delivered and deployed quite easily through mobile. And of course, good software would also deliver this in multiple languages of the respondent's choice. So instead of having a very bloated question, for example, the respondent can then select whether they want to give their responses in Chinese, Malay, English, or any other language. The second question to ask is, do you already have regular management meetings, operational meetings, so to speak? So if you don't yet, so definitely when EngageRocket was still a very early startup, we did not have formal management meetings because it just didn't make sense. The team was so small, we were talking every day on a daily basis anyway, and there was no need for operational meetings, formal operational meetings to discuss the day-to-day management. Even then, we did have quarterly meetings and town halls to share where the company was going and to find out a little bit more about what we could do for the next quarter. So why management meetings are important is because it gives an operating cadence already, which you can leverage for driving the people agenda. Without this operating cadence that's already established, to create one would indeed create a lot of organizational friction, because the change management around going from no meetings to more regular meetings would require a little bit of attention. But if those meetings already exist, you're already talking about inventory levels, yield levels, production, profit and loss on a regular basis. And this could be monthly or quarterly. And management is already doing mid-course corrections on all of their annual plans, during these operational meetings. What is missing from a lot of these operational meetings is the people element. How are people feeling through all of these changes that management is driving in the organization? And if it does come up, typically it is very qualitative. One of the business heads would share maybe that, oh yeah, we're going through quite a bit of change, moving from just offline channels to omni-channel sales. Our people are getting a little bit stressed, and please go easy on them. But what's the quantitative information on that sharing? Where exactly are they feeling the most stressed? Is it with identifying with the mission and purpose of the organization, or is it with just the workload, or is it that there are just a lot of new skill sets that they haven't mastered, which they suddenly need to figure out? We don't really know. So using pulse surveys, the best companies we've worked with have integrated the frequency of these surveys with the frequency of their management meetings. And I'll share a little bit more about that later this presentation. The third sanity check to ask yourself if you're ready for running pulse surveys is, do you have talent, like good people that you need to keep, meaning you can't afford to lose? Now, this might be a rhetorical question to many of you, but some that we've spoken with, unfortunately, have shared that in certain industries, the turnover rates are so high that actually it's just part of doing business, and they don't feel like they have the talent that they're even hiring talent, and they're just hiring warm bodies, and they feel like it's just the cost of doing business. So if you're in that category, by all means, you're definitely not ready to run pulse surveys, because the value of those surveys would not be there for you. However, if you do have talent that you need to keep, if you have good people that you believe help you drive the business forward, then you need to know what they're thinking on a more regular basis than once a year or once every 2 years. If you've done the hard work of attracting good talent to your company, but doesn't it make sense to find ways to keep them? And when you just look at the entire cycle of HR, where it's so difficult to hire good people, that with even the most advanced technologies and methodologies and recruiters that you work with are able to get you talent that have maybe just slightly higher than a 50-50 chance of succeeding. And the energies that go into keeping them, when you can, it's very easy to get, for example, managers to stop treating their employees like slaves and instead give them recognition, which is cost neutral and free. Wouldn't you want to make that change to preserve your talent instead of investing more and more in recruitment solutions to try to plug a leaky bucket? And then finally, the last question on the sanity check is, does HR in your company do more than just payroll and admin? Meaning they're already investing in learning and development, talent and performance management, and so on. Now, this is quite an important sanity check, because if in your company today, HR is actually still just doing payroll and admin, then I think there are bigger challenges to face than trying to implement a pulse survey program. There's a lot of other elements of talent management, learning and development that could be invested in. Maybe getting the right people within HR to pay attention to these areas would be the starting point. But before that, if you foresee that HR within your company is going to continue running in payroll and admin only for the foreseeable future, then maybe you're not ready, or it's not the right time for your company to be running pulse surveys. So those 4 areas, being mobile ready, number 2, being able to have talent that you need to keep. Number three, having payroll, having HR, being able to do more than just payroll and admin. And finally, having regular cadence of management meetings are what will help you determine whether or not you're ready for a pulse survey program. So moving forward into, once you've determined that you are ready, what exactly can you do to make this program successful? How do we execute on this program? The first step is actually relatively simple. So figuring out what is your hypothesis. So by adopting a pulse survey program, you want to be targeting this at a business relevant topic. So for example, it might be that you've noticed over the past few years that about 60% of your new hires leave the company within the first year. Now, if that is true, it might be due to a number of different things. It might be due to, number one, that you're hiring the wrong type of people for that role, and maybe you need to change your hiring. Or perhaps number two, it might be you're hiring the right people, but you're not equipping the line managers to be able to onboard and engage the new talent that they're bringing in. So you can actually test both of these hypotheses using pulse surveys. So the first hypothesis around whether you're hiring the right kind of people, you can actually pulse survey new hires in cohorts to understand how much they think that their skills are a fit for the roles that they've been hired for. So if you track this over time and you tweak your hiring process such that you bring in different types of, different profiles of talent, you can then compare not only the resultant, which would be percentage of first-year attrition, but also a leading indicator of that in terms of the percentage of the new hires that actually say that, yeah, actually my role is a great fit for the skills that I have. If it is the second hypothesis that you're testing, that hiring managers may not be well equipped to engage and onboard their new hires, then running pulse surveys on the entire team that reports into these relevant hiring managers on their engagement levels would show you the impact of new hires on that team's engagement. And you'll then be able to identify within less than the course of a year whether first-year attrition is indeed because new hires come in and within a short span of time start getting disengaged because either they don't have clear understanding of what they need to do, or they feel alienated and not connected with other relevant people within the organization, all of which can be changed by the hiring managers. And then the relevant interventions would then be, how do we set our hiring managers up for success in terms of being able to deliver for them greater awareness about what they need to do to onboard their new hires. The second step, once you've built your hypotheses, is to look at your existing operational processes. So if you look back at the example that I've just shared, on what frequency do we review together with our hiring managers and our business leaders our hiring funnel and our attrition funnel? Do we review this on a quarterly basis, on a monthly basis? What is the correct tempo that we're doing this? If we're not currently doing it and it's ad hoc, then perhaps we need to align that with the rest of our management meetings if it is indeed a priority. And when you look at, say, a problem like losing 60% of your people in the first year, what this might be costing your business could be anywhere from 10 to 15% of your staff costs, the salary that you're paying. Is just being flowed into a leaky bucket. So then aligning it with an operational process would make sense in terms of creating a certain amount of discipline in the action plan that you're taking to address that particular problem. Secondly, being able to do it this way increases the relevance of the survey results. So it doesn't just mean that the survey results are more top of mind for the business and even within HR. It also makes the results a lot more relevant for the business leaders, because they can see almost immediately by changing the way, for example, that we've been training hiring managers to onboard our new hires. Instantly, that has created an impact in the engagement that new hires feel 1 month, 3 months after joining the company. And we are already starting to see that that's creating an impact on reducing first-year churn. The third step to getting this right is to ask the right questions. Now, there's a common saying within data analysis where if you get garbage in, you get garbage out. So if you're not asking the right questions from the beginning, you're going to be acting on insight that might be misguided or outright wrong. So here, there are actually 3 things to consider. The first thing is the length of the questionnaire. So if you're asking questions on a regular basis, say every month or every quarter, the length of the questionnaire is going to be slightly different. As a general rule of thumb, you don't want to be asking more than 30 questions and taking more than 2 to 3 minutes in response time, especially for online mobile-based surveys. In our experience, we've seen a huge drop-off in the completion rate of these surveys once you get to more than 30 questions or more than 2 to 3 minutes of response time. And these are just, of course, for the regular surveys that you're asking. If you're asking one-off episodic surveys, this would be different again. But paying attention to the right length of the questionnaire would be important. The second thing to look at is the composition of the questions, between what kind of questions do you want to trend across the organization, and what kind of questions do you want to use more specifically to guide action. So again, as a general rule of thumb, we would recommend that you have about 50 to 60% of your questions that are trending questions, and these might be employee engagement related questions, values questions that you're trying to drive, employee net promoter score for those of you that use it, so that you can trend past data to present and future data. However, you want to also reserve 40 to 50% of the questions that you're asking to backward and forward-looking questions. So these are questions that deal with initiatives, interventions that have happened and that are going to happen. So you want to, for example, for initiatives that have happened, you want to find out how specifically did they go, where people felt that there were choke points, what people liked, what they didn't like. And then for upcoming initiatives, what is it that people want to see from them? What are the expectations that have been set? And so on. So being able to identify both questions that you can trend and questions that allow you more specific insight into the kind of initiatives that you're running to guide action would be important. And then finally, the last consideration is identifying behavioral questions versus outcome questions. So an example of an outcome question would be, for instance, overall, how satisfied are you with working at your company? A behavior question, on the other hand, would be, I have received recognition for doing good work within the past week. So one is behavior that you can directly change or directly influence, and one is an outcome of those behaviors. So you want to have a good mix of behavioral and outcome questions. Generally speaking, we find that you will only ask maybe 2 to 3 different outcome questions for a general engagement survey that you want to target, and then ask the rest of the questions around behaviors. While we're talking about right questions, there's a quick word that I'd like to throw in about benchmarks. So we often get asked, like, how do we know if we're good or bad? And indeed, in such cases, having external benchmarks can be quite useful. For example, on the Employee Net Promoter Score question, how likely are you to recommend EngageRocket to your friend as a place to work to your friends and family? Now, I want to know how our teams perhaps have been answering these questions in relation to other teams. So that would be important to me, maybe at the beginning. However, I think what is more important to me would be, how is this trend changing over time? So are the interventions that I'm investing in moving the needle at all, or is it actually counterproductive when I'm trying to change these external benchmarks? So definitely, for some of the trending questions that you're tracking, it would make sense to have some external benchmarks every once in a while. But when you're running a pulse survey program, your data is changing so regularly that the most important thing for you would be identifying the internal benchmarks. How is the action I'm taking making changes to my organization in a meaningful way? My co-founder Dorothy has actually written a good piece on benchmarks, which we will include a link to during in the video notes. Finally, the last step that needs to be taken is perhaps also the most important for making this successful. Communicate, communicate, communicate. And this is to prepare leaders as well as to the individual respondents on what they can expect from the program. So especially to the leaders, to be able to share your hypotheses upfront, if possible, so that they understand what it is that they're testing for, what is it that they're hoping to achieve out of this initiative. Recently, we had a review session with a company, and their CEO was just sharing certain concerns that he had about the Pulse survey program, about how they weren't sure about the anonymity. They didn't know whether or not people were responding correctly, quote unquote, to the survey questions. And basically wondering, after running a program like this for a year, what can they do to improve it? So I asked him a question, like, so when you started out this journey, what was it that you're hoping to achieve? And did we achieve it? And it was disappointing that he was stumped by that question. And now, I mean, at this point in time, they're going through and figuring that out in terms of what they need to do for the next round of pulse surveys that they're going to be running. But to prevent such situations from happening, perhaps being able to communicate upfront and gather from the business what exactly their challenges are and how your pulse survey program is going to support them in addressing the people elements of this challenge. That's probably going to be paramount in ensuring the success of this program, especially in the eyes of your critical stakeholders, the rest of the business. So now moving on to the common mistake that's sabotaging participation rates, and it's not what you think it is. Now, needless to say, to most of you, you already know this, that participation matters. It matters in terms of the data quality of the survey results, in terms of representativeness, in terms of a rule of thumb. If about 80% of your respondents have answered their surveys and completed their surveys, this can be considered a representative survey, or it can be approximated to a census. And in fact, we've seen companies with thousands of employees actually who can achieve participation rates of above 95%. So how do they do this, and what is the problem that they tackle to ensure that participation is high? And it's not just bugging people to take the survey or threatening them or coercing them. The number one problem is this: people don't feel heard. They take the survey, the results go into a black hole, and they do this once, they do this twice, and after a while they give up and lose trust that their feedback actually matters. Part of this is, of course, the time lag between survey results and the survey completion rather, and the results and communication around what happened after. And part of it can actually be solved. So you want to be able to give employees a voice, obviously, such that they can hear. But then immediately after they have given their feedback, we can either share with them a dashboard, or as a manager, to be able to acknowledge, I hear you, just to make them feel that, yes, my feedback didn't go into a black hole, and that my boss has personally acknowledged that they have received this. Secondly, to also be able to reply almost in an anonymized live chat feature to say that, actually, I wasn't clear about the feedback that you gave. Do you mind sharing a little bit more about what you meant? Now, this means so much to the individual employee, because not only are they able to share their feedback, they're able to clarify what they mean. And secondly, to them, it also matters that their boss is taking an interest in taking action on their feedback. And they know it's not going to be immediate, maybe. I mean, everyone is realistic, but at least they are heard. And all of this can happen in an anonymized environment to be able to protect the identity of the person who has responded. Now, this we found can tremendously improve participation rates in the long term, especially for pulse surveys, where you're asking employees to give their feedback on as often as weekly or monthly or quarterly. So finally, in the last 10 minutes or so, we're going to be covering how do we use the data to actually make better management decisions. So running pulse surveys actually supports the ability of teams to run in an agile way. So at the individual manager level, they can actually execute and test different management interventions in a very, very short period of time. Changes in communication style and so on. And they can learn very quickly what works and what doesn't work based on the survey results that they get. It's also important in terms of the immediacy of their response, because people can then feel that their voices are heard. For example, in a retail type environment, if a store manager is finding that one week, the clarity of expectations that his team is actually crashing, he can then immediately ask them, what's going on? Why is it that you guys aren't clear about what you're doing anymore? And they might reply, well, there are a lot of customers that came in last week with these coupons, and I had no idea what they did. And it frustrated the customers. They were yelling at us, and of course, it frustrated us. So it would really help if the marketing team would share with us what exactly is going on with these coupons and how we're supposed to deal with them. So the manager can then immediately take action, go to the marketing department, get trained on what these new promotions are, and come back and train his team. By the next week, he can then see, does this actually move the needle? Did it help in terms of clear expectations? And if not, he can go back again and say, hey, I've already done this. It looks like it didn't change much. What else is the issue? So being able to learn fast allows managers to close that loop a lot quicker than having no data management system, or worse, only finding out what his team thinks once a year. The other thing that you can do with the data is to determine the interventions that are run, and to also forecast, for example, their impact on attrition. So you can use a combination of three factors: survey results, managers' action or inaction, and the participation rates, to be able to identify engagement or not, or disengagement within every team. And if you're running such a program for the first time, please don't incentivize on results. Don't have manager bonuses based on the results, because this can skew the results unnaturally, as managers exert undue pressure on their staff to give good survey results without actually taking action. And even later on, when the change is more embedded, do weigh the considerations carefully, because while the tool works, it is effective. And the moment teams lose trust in it, it might take some time before you can use or gain the effectiveness of such a tool again. So what kind of effectiveness can you expect? So slicing and dicing the data to determine interventions. What can you actually use? For example, to be able to break out all the different engagement drivers for surgical action. So being able to identify, it's quite granular detail, what elements of the organization or what segments of the organization have problems, and how do we address them. For more advanced managers, you'll be able to then hopefully get actions that are suggested to you. So if you're using more sophisticated survey tools like EngageRocket, you'll be able to quite get proactive suggestions that are data-driven to every single team manager on how they can improve the engagements on their team, so that they don't have to make this up on their own. If you're solving for productivity, you might be able to map out for the organization a productivity map and calculate the ROI over time from the improvements that you're making through the pulse survey. So promoters, for example, might return more than $5 for every dollar invested in them. They're going to be passives in your organization, and they're just giving you back $1 for every dollar invested in them, and that's fine. But then there are going to be detractors who are actually costing you an additional $2 for every dollar invested, for example. And then you have the costs of attrition as well that might happen. So using pulse surveys, you'll actually be able to map out this productivity map for your organization in real time, to allow for faster learning loops, to keep pace with business challenges, digital transformation, senior leader transitions, and so on. You can also solve for attrition, tracking voluntary versus involuntary attrition, regrettable versus non-regrettable attrition. We actually even have built an attrition cost calculator, which you might want to try out, which a link of which we will also put in the show notes in the description of this video. So how do we move from surveys, in terms of the bad old days where it took a lot of investment and a lot of effort for very, very limited return, to hopefully today, where the effort and investment is very minimal, while the returns are much higher? So that helps us in HR to move and evolve from just being a cost center to actually being a driver of business performance. Now, an independent study that was done on applying analytics within HR showed that for every dollar spent on HR analytics or people analytics, it yielded $13 to the business. And all of it came from levers like reducing attrition effectively, developing leaders, and successfully helping the organization transform. So we're coming to the end of our time together, and I wanted to share with all of you who have been patient all the way to this point, an exclusive gift for joining us live. So we've gone through a lot today, and what we wanted to share with you was a quick launch checklist, which is a single one-pager that you can use to launch your very first Pulse survey. So if you just use this QR code, it'll take you to a link where you can download that checklist immediately. And you can use it immediately when you're thinking about running your next Pulse survey. So of course, we hope that you would run that survey using EngageRocket. And if you do want to do that, this is our contact details. Please do reach out to us. But if not, I do wish you all the best in your Pulse survey journey. Do write to us as well to share any feedback or challenges that you've had while running it, and we'd be happy to share with you what best practices we've encountered and seen. Well, with that, thank you very much for your time. It's been a real pleasure sharing all our experiences with you across more than 500,000 responses that we've analyzed across 13 different markets in APAC. And I do hope that this will be useful for you in your own people analytics journey. Until next time, have a great afternoon ahead. I've been Chetan, and this is EngageRocket's Analytics Lab. Take care.